Hi everyone, welcome to our online winter weather training. My name is Jessica, and in this video I'm going to talk about how to measure snow. Measuring snow can be a little trickier than some people think, especially out here on the high plains where the wind can really come into play. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I want to talk about are some of the main tools used when measuring snow. Pictured here is a snowboard, which is typically a piece of plywood painted white. It acts as a surface for the snow to collect. The reason they are painted white is to help keep them cool, since the color white tends to reflect the sun's rays, while the color black absorbs them. The last thing we want is for the snow to melt before we get the chance to go out and measure it. Snowboards should be placed in an open area away from buildings and trees. They can really help when trying to get an accurate snow measurement. As snow first falls, it tends to accumulate on the top of the grass blades, not all the way down to the ground. So, that means if you measure the snow and are pushing a yardstick or ruler all the way down to the dirt, you will be inflating the snow amount. So, let's add a ruler to this example. If we have the ruler down at the dirt, we would be measuring about 4 inches of snow, when in reality there looks to be about 2 inches of snow. This is where a snowboard can help because the board sits on top of the grass and is a hard surface that the snow can gather onto. If you are worried about being able to find your board when it is buried in the snow, it's a good idea to mark it. A couple things you can use are flags or stakes to mark the location of your board. Another important tool in measuring snow is what you use to measure the snow width. Traditionally, newly fallen snow is measured in inches and tenths of an inch. That is what makes a snow ruler special, is that it is clearly marked in tenths of an inch. However, we do not expect everyone to go out and buy a special ruler just for measuring snow. So, if you have a ruler at home or a tape measure, that will also work. The final tool here is a rain gauge. It is used for measuring liquid precipitation, but it does have a purpose when measuring snowfall. A rain gauge is perfect for measuring the liquid equivalent of snow, also known as how much liquid water is in the snow when you melt it. But we will have another video that goes into more detail on that. For now, I just want you to know that there are 3 parts to a rain gauge. The funnel, which collects water and funnels it into the second part, which is the inner tube. Meanwhile, the inner tube sits in the overflow tube. The overflow tube, or the outer tube, is where the inner tube can overflow if it gets full. More importantly, in the wintertime, you take the inner tube and the funnel out of the overflow tube and you leave it open so that the snow can fall into it easier. This is what's shown in the picture on the right. Let's go ahead and cut to another look at some of these tools. Alright, so the first thing we're going to talk about here is our snowboard. So this is one from here at the National Weather Service. We have one that's 3 feet by 3 feet, which you can see is a bit large. So if you have one at home, 2 feet by 2 feet is fine. You'll want to remember to paint it white. That way it'll reflect the sun's rays and not absorb them, and hopefully your snow will stick around long enough for you to measure it. Our next item here is a flag. So let's say your snowboard gets covered in snow. It's breezy, so wind's kind of blowing. It's a little hard to see. You have a flag, or you can even have some stakes around, and what you'll do is stick those in the ground by your board. That way you'll be able to find it a lot easier. Our next items here are some measuring tools. So this is one of the favorites here at the Weather Service office. It's a snow stick, and each inch is broken down into tenths of an inch. So that way, whenever we go out and measure the snow, we can measure it down to a tenth of an inch. It even has a little bit of a point here for us to kind of chop it into the snow. We also have yardsticks broken down to tenths of an inch. But for you guys at home, feel free to use your regular ruler or even a tape measure to do the job. Our last item here we're going to talk about is a rain gauge. So with the rain gauge, you'll remember I said in the presentation it has 3 parts to it. So we've got the funnel, we've got the inner tube, and we've got the outer tube. So you'll have the rain fall into the funnel, which will funnel it into our inner tube. The inner tube can hold 1 inch in this case, and it's broken down to hundredths, so we can read the precipitation down to 1/100th of an inch. And in the case that there's more than an inch of rain, this tube will overflow into our overflow tube, and then we'll be able to measure what we got inside of there. Now for the winter time, we're going to take our funnel and our inner tube out of our overflow tube and leave it open so that the snow can fall in a lot easier. Because I don't know if you know this, but it's kind of a small hole here, so the snow can definitely gather in there and tends to block it. So one last treat for you guys. I have the 8-inch rain gauge that we have here at the National Weather Service office. So as you can see, it's pretty big. The reason they call it an 8-inch rain gauge is because the diameter of it is 8 inches. And it has the same parts to it as our smaller gauge here. We've got the funnel, we've got the inner tube, and we've got our big can here, which can collect any overflow. So let's go ahead and get back to our presentation. So when should snow be measured? It is best to measure snow as soon as it stops falling. The reason being that over time the snow will begin to melt or settle, which can lower your measurement. When it comes to reporting to the National Weather Service, we appreciate you sending us snow reports as frequently as you would like. But do try your best to provide a snow total measurement once the snow is ended. You will want to measure in a place far away from any drifting or melting. You want the spot to be as representative as possible. Then you will slide your snow stick down until it meets the snowboard or the ground. If not using a snowboard, try to account for the gap between the dirt and the snow that we talked about earlier. It may be helpful to brush some snow away from the measuring site to make a hole and see how big the gap is between the dirt and where the snow begins. Next, it's time to measure. Try to get down at eye level to more accurately read how high the snow comes up to on your ruler. Reading from higher up could give you an inaccurate measurement. If using a snowboard, clean it off and place it on top of the snow. Then any new snowfall that occurs can be measured. Let's take a moment to run through some of these instructions. So the first thing that we want you to do in measuring snow is to go out and find a nice level spot. It should be away from any trees, vehicles, buildings, or other obstructions. You also want to try to have an area that's shielded from the wind if possible. We know that can be hard to do out here. So the next thing to do is to take your ruler or whatever you're measuring with and stick it in the snow until it hits your snowboard. If you don't have a snowboard and you're measuring in the grass, be sure to adjust your measurement for that gap we talked about earlier that occurs between the bottom of the snow and the dirt. So the next thing you want to do is take your measurement. But you don't want to take it from the standing up position because that can give you an inaccurate measurement. You'll want to bend down and be sure to measure at eye level. In the case where you're doing this outside and you're on the ground, you'll probably have to bend down onto your knees, so it may be a good idea to bring something out with you that you can kneel onto. That way your knees won't get wet. So once you've measured your snow, go ahead and take a mental note of what the measurement is. Then you'll want to clear your board off of any snow. Go ahead and do that. Then sometimes it helps to flip your board over and you'll want to place it on the old snow. That way, when any new snow falls, it'll fall into a clean board and you'll be able to measure it without having the old snow interfering. Once you've done that, the last step is to go ahead and send your measurement in to the National Weather Service. There are some areas that you should avoid when measuring. The first is around trees, buildings, vehicles, and other obstructions. Objects and buildings can block the snow or cause drifting to occur, which will cause inaccurate measurements. Speaking of snowdrifts, it is really important to not measure in snowdrifts because doing so will inflate the amount of snow that actually fell. Since the snow is gathered all in one place or drift, the depth does not actually represent the amount of snow that has fallen. This doesn't mean that you can't measure snowdrifts entirely. You can definitely measure your drift and report its depth to us. Just please do not report it as the snowfall you received during the snowstorm. Never measure the depth of snow in a rain gauge. The snow that is in the gauge is used to find the liquid equivalent by melting it down. You may be sitting there saying to yourself, Well, yeah, this is all fine and dandy when there's no wind and everything fell straight down, but we live in the high plains. Well, yes, that is very true. Blowing snow is a real measuring problem out here. It makes it very, very difficult. So when you have blowing snow, you need to measure in multiple places. The measuring rules I've already said still apply. So you do not want to measure by obstructions like trees or in snowdrifts, but you still take several measurements in representative areas, and then you take an average of those measurements. Let's look at an example. So let's say we just had a blizzard with 45-mile-per-hour winds. Snow was blowing everywhere. That makes it really hard to measure. It seems pretty much impossible. In that situation, you really just have to do the best that you can. The main points that I want you to remember when measuring are to try avoiding obstructions. So remember, you want to stay away from trees, vehicles, and buildings. The next big point is to not measure in snowdrifts. That can really set off your measurement. So what you need to do is you need to take several measurements in representative areas and then take the average. So in our example here, we have a spot that measures 2 inches, another representative spot that measures 3 inches, and then another spot that measures 4 inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the 2, the 3, and the 4 together. That's going to give us 9. Then we're going to divide it by the number of measurements we took, which is 3. So 9 divided by 3 is 3. That gives us an average snowfall measurement of 3 inches, and that's what we're going to go with. This concludes the snow measuring portion of the winter weather training. This last slide shows pictures that we have received over the past couple of winters from our followers on Facebook and Twitter. If you look, you may see a name that you recognize. We hope that you are able to use what you've learned in this video and send some snow reports our way this winter and many winters to come. Thanks for watching!